But at minus 30 in Sault Ste. Marie, hey, I'm barbecuing, right? I'm a shorts and sandals guy, right? And I will go outside at minus 30 in my shorts because there is no humidity, right? My wife looks at me like I'm nuts, right? But I'll put my Crocs on and out I go.
You're listening to the Soo Podcast with your host, Ryan Keeney.
This is the place to hear from members of the Sault Ste. Marie community and beyond.
We're on a mission to give local voices a platform to share their stories and experiences.
Whether it's supporting small business, discussing local politics, or tracking real estate trends, find it all on the Soo Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. Today we have an exciting guest with us, Rory Ring, the CEO and president of the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce. In 2016, Mr. Ring joined the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce, moving from Sarnia, where he lived for 15 years, and ran the Sarnia-Lambton Chamber of Commerce for 3 years. Rory has always been focused on the need for a community to build a sustainable and growing economic base from within, while maintaining a strong open for global business philosophy. He's a firm believer in the leadership that is provided by the Chamber of Commerce network and those professionals who have dedicated their professional careers to doing what no other leadership role does in each of the Chamber communities. He is a former director of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce Board, Canadian Chamber Executive of Canada, Sault Ste. Marie Downtown Association, Sault Ste. Marie Economic Development Corporation, and past chair and current director of the Chamber Executives of Ontario. Prior to joining the Chamber of Commerce profession, he was a commercial banker and innovation lender with strong roots in cultivating and financing successful business operations. He has an MBA from Queen's University and a degree in political science from the University of Western Ontario. Interestingly, Mr. Ring also brings a very principled and ethically focused vision to his business values. Specifically, he strongly believes that diversity and inclusion are multifaceted issues and that we need to tackle these subjects holistically to better engage and support all underrepresented groups within the business community. To do this, he believes we also need to address honestly and head-on the concerns and needs of our diverse employers and diverse employees to increase equity for all, including, but not limited to, Indigenous peoples, the Black community, the Asian community, and other racialized communities in Canada, as well as members of the 2S LGBTQ plus community, persons with disabilities, and women. Collectively, as business leaders, we must do more to ensure welcoming workplaces for all, not only to address current labor market shortages, but to ensure economic prosperity and the future of Sault Ste. Marie. Wow, I really like that, Rory.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
It's funny, like when I'm reading about bios from different guests, potential guests, actual guests, been on the show, that kind of thing, and I read about all these interesting people in the Soo, and I read so much about people's accomplishments. Like, this is what I've done. These are titles that I've had. These are my credentials and that kind of thing. And it's not often that I get to see, especially a business and commercial leader, focus a lot of their sort of business self-identity around the idea of the betterment of the community for all. Where especially I think the conversation has evolved so much over the last 10 to 20 years in breaking down barriers for all communities, especially marginalized communities who are trying to break that glass ceiling and get further and further. It's not something I think it's talked about more so these days, a lot more. 20 years ago, it wasn't like that. 20 years ago, people
absolutely.
weren't actively, especially in particularly influential positions like the positions that you've held. There wasn't enough of those conversations, I think, that were going on 20 years ago, but so much of that has changed for the better, I believe.
No, absolutely. And that's really what makes the difference in a community is being able to have that holistic look and understanding that as a leader, you have a role.
Right.
You have that role and you need to adopt that challenge and live it in your everyday life. Right. And, coming from a banking background of always being connected to the business community in one way or another.
Right.
And you see, especially, if you look at a banker, if you just take a look at a traditional banker, right? Everybody thinks you kind of fit in this little bit of a box, right?
Specific demographic.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's always been nice to sort of bring a little bit of a different spin, even to within the banking space, especially when you're dealing with entrepreneurs, right? Because an entrepreneur, it's hard to understand in the first place, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people just don't understand that. Coming from a place like Sarnia and coming to Sault Ste. Marie, the similarities are incredibly aligned. You know, small community, border community, industrial community.
Yep.
Reliance, if you like, on many businesses, on a major employer like Algoma Steel or the petrochemical industry in Sarnia.
Right.
And, you know, there's a certain, what I call a certain social economic leveling, because, you know, 20 to 30 years ago, you could have come out of high school and made $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
You could have done 7 years of education, become a dentist, and started at $100,000 a year.
Right.
You know, but you've also invested, you know, $500,000 in your education as a dentist, whereas the other person has had 7 years to accumulate wealth.
Right.
And that reality, you know, is something I think that really influences the way that you view entrepreneurship and you view how society values entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs come in all shapes and sizes. They come in all colors. They come in all beliefs. And, you know, when you're in the banking industry, you have to be able to look at that and manage, if you like, the risk.
Right.
So, you know, taking all those things into account gives you, I think, a philosophy in life that makes you listen, which is an absolute key, and to listen to all groups and all diverse opinions. Because at the end of the day, when you fast forward that to today, and that 20 to 30 years of evolution, studies prove out time and time again that a more diverse team comes out with a better decision.
Interesting.
A more diverse board has better decision-making capabilities. It has a greater propensity to succeed than fail. So, you know, there's purpose to having that kind of perspective and living it. So titles are great, don't get me wrong, but unless it's a title where you can exert influence,
right,
then really truly what value are you bringing to the table?
Right.
So when I look at that and I bring that living life to my role as a leader of a chamber of commerce, you know, quite simply, you know, and I've been thinking along these lines for a number of years. When you think about, okay, what does a chamber of commerce do?
I imagine that is something that our audience, many people in the audience are probably wondering.
No, absolutely. And, you know, I'll just sort of say what I've come to live with today and maybe talk a little bit about some of the other elements in detail about what a chamber does. But at the end of the day, when you really think, and this kind of perspective is crystallized over the pandemic, and we can talk about some of the things we did, but really you make a difference. That's simply what you are trying to do. You're trying to make a difference in your members, your member businesses, your member stakeholders. You're trying to make a difference in your community and then exert influence outside through other networks like the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and make a difference on those levels as well. So, you know, it's that pebble in the pond, right? And you have to be that pebble and echo that out. And as you say, you know, live a full life and a transparent life and an ethical life as well.
A random small business owner or aspiring small business owner in the Soo who is thinking to themselves, you know, one day I would love to become an entrepreneur, quit my day job, be in charge of my future, build something interesting in this small town that I call my home. And as they're moving along this journey, how would, let's say, their involvement in the Chamber of Commerce help them along that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a journey because, you know, when you start as just, you know, a single entrepreneur trying to build a company and you move through the various stages of the growth and maturity, if you like, there's different things that you need in terms of supports to bring you through that journey. And as your business potentially grows and you bring on employees, they'll also be at different stages within their own journey within that entity, right?
Right.
So when we look at a member, it's not actually just the principal of the business that's the member. It's actually all the employees as well.
Right. Okay.
So when we take a look at, you know, just the profile of the chamber, we were founded in 1889. We still have members that have been members for over 100 years. I mean, just imagine that. And we can talk about that history too, maybe a little bit later in terms of why diversity counts and why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. you have to build yourself upon that legacy, right? But you also have to be very adaptive because businesses are changing. And there's no finer example, of course, than going through the last 3 years and the demands that have been placed on business, whether they survived successfully, whether they were challenged, or whether they failed. So when we look at what a chamber does to support, small businesses, I look at it as sort of in 4 segments, if you want, or as in 4 buckets. And one is the business that really is focused on driving cash flow and establishing credibility. So when you become a member of the Chamber of Commerce, you sign on to really a code of conduct saying that, you will work within the confines of law and respect and those type of things. We have a process if there's an offside and that's brought to our attention. So that allows you to say, hey, I'm a chamber member, but it also comes back to say, hey, I make a contribution to my community. I'm not just here for myself, but as I build my business, I'm building my business to give back. And, this is one of the things, that I talk about is that sometimes when you're in communities like ours, they don't understand entrepreneurship and what it means to be an entrepreneur. And I always say to be an entrepreneur means that you're first in the office, you're the last in the office, and you're the last to get paid, right? And it may take 3 to 5 years for you to take home a paycheck. And you may have your house on the line. You may have liquidated assets. You might have borrowed money from friends or from family, taking that blood money, if you like, to get started. So that gets you to the second component of how do you support a small business. And I call it a business builder. Establish credibility, build a network, have colleagues that you can bounce ideas off of. And that allows you to drive cash flow because cash is king, right? Unless you got revenue, you can't pay the bills. And it's a daily management of that thing. So what chambers of commerce do, they are able to bring you together and give you exposure to potential revenue opportunities. Prior to the shutdowns, we did expos or trade shows, if you like. So bringing our members into contact with potential buyers or introducing them into supply chains, right? So getting them connected in meetings. If we have a meeting with Algoma Steel, to have members of our board of directors from a very diverse background are able to think, okay, how can I connect? Maybe an opportunity for myself, but maybe an opportunity for my centers of influence, right? Or somebody within our network. How do we do that? So that helps sort of establish the need to drive that cash flow for survival. Like literally, it's about survival. And then, what you see in the next stage then is you start to level your cash flow requirements out. You're driving that revenue. People understand the credibility that you have in market. Now you want to focus a little bit more on terms of gaining greater exposure to market or maybe internalizing operations and building better capacity internally to hire employees or whatnot. So we really talk about that, building capacity and building competitiveness. And that you look at as being in that bucket of a business investor. So now you've driven your cash flow and now you're going to be reinvesting back into your business so that you can be more competitive. You can hire people. So we do things like offer an employee benefit plan. We offer affinity programs that are like a gas card will save you 3.5 cents a liter, which is available to the business and your employees, don't forget. So employee retention, right? Or attraction. So if you have things that allow them to save a little bit of money, that also makes you a little more competitive in the labor market. And then, of course, we offer the ability to get exposure through marketing, whether it's social media or newsletter, involving yourself as a sponsor at a Business After 5 or Take 5, as we call it, Take 5 Love Local, and even participating in that as a Take 5 Love Local, which we transitioned out of because of the Shop Local campaigns we did during the pandemic, just to make sure people realize the benefit of shopping local and keeping your money local and how that has a tremendous economic impact. So now you give those businesses the ability, which is that has the potential to move into what we call a business community investor. So now you're starting to participate maybe on some committees in the community and volunteer your time, or you're a board member of the Chamber of Commerce, or you're a member of one of our committees. So now you're really focused on building Sault Ste. Marie's business community, and that can be things like advocating at City Hall as well. So we're focused on, property taxes, because people don't realize that a business pays either 4 to 8 times more property tax, depending on your classification, than a residential property.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's very, very significant, right? So we spend some time making sure that our counselors and the public service understand that the business community is very sensitive to that, because Sault Ste. Marie has to compete against not only all communities in Ontario, but all communities globally, right, for economic wealth. So, we look to provide access then for people to participate at a community level and make that difference at a community level. And then the final sort of bucket, the final segment that we have is your community investor, right? So they have their business model. They've got sustainable revenue. They're competitive. They've got the credibility. They're doing things in the community, but they really want to just take things to the next level. A great example of that is Algoma Steel investing $1 million in the addiction recovery facility. There's people that provide capital, Rotary providing funds to support the splash pad or to build a downtown piazza. Those monies are generated generally from the business community or, successful entrepreneurs that are retired and want to put money back into the community. So you look at those things, and that really is what a Chamber of Commerce does. And if you try to put all of that speak together,
right, it
comes again down to that one thing, that these are your difference makers. Right. So the Chamber is a difference maker. You can make a difference in your business. You make a difference in your community, your province, or your country. So that really, in a nutshell, is, kind of where we are today. And then, those comments around diversity is now looking to the future.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you were explaining that to me was something that I find both simultaneously very exciting about the Soo, but also unfortunately disappointing for consumers, is the following. When I think about the business opportunities and the sort of general economic infrastructure in the Soo, I see on the one hand an enormous demand on the consumer side. There are people who are ready and willing to happily purchase the services offered by a local entrepreneur, local small business owner. On the other hand, unfortunately, there doesn't appear to be enough service providers in certain areas. Take, for example, just the other day, we were looking for a vet for our dog. We called around a whole bunch of different clinics, and every single clinic we called said, unfortunately, we're over capacity right now, and we're not able to take any more patients. And I was like, that's just something I never even had to consider when I was living in the GTA. I could sort of like pick from among a wide variety of veterinary options, and I could take my pet, sort of to whichever one I felt was most comfortable, whichever was closest to where I lived, what have you. And I imagine, that's just one very specific service. I'm sure there's a long list of many, many different types of services here in the Soo where you have people who are calling around. There is a need that needs to be filled. There's commerce that's waiting to happen. The demand side is there. The consumer side is there. But it's like, where are the service providers? And that, to me, although it's unfortunate for consumers and customers, it also does present somewhat of an exciting opportunity for entrepreneurs. And, since we're on the topic of entrepreneurship, we're on the topic of growing small business in the Soo, in my mind, there's this gap that's waiting to be filled by whichever, entrepreneurial personalities might want to take up the calling. Right now, it doesn't have to be a young veterinarian or something starting on their career. It could be all kinds of things. When I thought about, why not try to fill one particular space, which is the podcasting space. Not to say there's not great media and entertainment coming out of the Soo. I'm sure that there is. But it's one way that I can sort of like add to the space. In some sense, I view that as sort of an entrepreneurial journey, even though it's not motivated so much by financial gain or that kind of thing. And for me, it's more of a passion. But at the same time, it makes me think about the markets that are waiting to be filled. And there's a lot of them out here. I think there is a certain level of excitement to it, as unfortunate as it is for consumers right now.
Yeah, it's a great point that you make. And here's some of the dynamic that's happening as I listen to you talk about, what is your purpose around doing this? And this whole movement around entrepreneurship to social purpose. You have this concept that you're a not-for-profit, like we're a not-for-profit. But I'll tell you right now, we need to drive positive cash flow, right? Because it's the only way to survive. But really, what is the result? The result is, not, an income or issuing dividend to shareholders. It's actually about social profit.
Right.
And what you're doing of those things that I just described. And part of that social profit is trying to demonstrate that there's a benefit to creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? So working with other partners like the Innovation Center, like Millworks, like the Community Development Corporation, or Algoma Workforce Investment, Corporation, different partners, the university, the college, to start thinking about, you need to be educating people on what it means to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right. And whether that is totally profit seeking, which is good, or social profit seeking, which is equally as good. Right. Different measures, different impacts. So you're exactly right. We need more entrepreneurs in Sault Ste. Marie. We need to create a stronger entrepreneurial ecosystem. Coming from a more populated jurisdiction, there's tons of supports out there. There's tons of places to go. There's tons of people to talk to about your entrepreneurial journey. It's limited in Sault Ste. Marie. And, I think people need to understand we need to be talking about the entrepreneurial dream. So here's, cycling back to a bit of my earlier conversation about how people view entrepreneurship in a community, whether it's Sault Ste. Marie or Sarnia, or is that if you're an entrepreneur and you start a business, at least within the first year, you're buying islands in the Canaries. And that's kind of the way people think, right? Like I can go work at Algoma Steel. I can make $100,000, or you could have worked in the petrochemical industry and made 150. My son's a heavy diesel mechanic in Grand Prairie and probably makes $200,000, right? And so you have to think about perspective, where they are coming from.
Right.
And I remember when the first conversations around increasing minimum wage were coming, and they were going to be a 30 to 40% increase. And, writing a letter to the premier at that time and saying, small businesses just can't afford that. Small businesses, as I just opened up with, they're the first to arrive in the morning, they're the last to leave at night, and they're the last on the payroll. And they're trying to make sure that, they not have a right to own a home?
Right.
To go on a trip, to buy a 4x4 or an ATV. What makes you think that they can just pay everybody else, right? Because honestly, at the end of the day, if you don't make money, how do you live?
Yeah.
And then you have to say to yourself, wow, geez, I could make $80,000 working for the government, or I can make minimum wage working for myself with the hope of someday making the same wage. So part of what we try to do, because of our representations strongly connected to the private sector, is to say, the private sector is good. And we're currently living in an environment that actually is, I think, making people think that if you're in business for yourself, you're totally self-centered, you're getting all the wealth, you're not sharing the pie, you're not doing any of those things, which is wrong. It's just wrong.
Yeah, that characterization seems really unfair.
Yeah, when you think about it, we go back to those models: the business builder, the business investor, the community investor, and the business community investor. When you take a look at it, if you're down in the business builder and the business investor, your dream is to get to those other two levels.
Right.
To somehow make a contribution to community, sponsoring sports teams, sponsoring arts and culture, sponsoring the build out of capital infrastructure, all those things. And what you see as more wealth is created personally, more of that wealth is actually shared to community.
Right.
And you don't have to tax it out of them. You don't have to permit it out of them. you don't have to have government grow to such a stage to try and force them to do that. Natural market forces and the social good in people will make those investments happen. So that's why it's so incredibly important to embrace entrepreneurship and what it stands for, but also as a non-entrepreneur to understand it, which is why, you know, we had the opportunity to make an investment in a Shop Local program that was federally funded, but it really was to connect the dots, right? It's just say, you know what, for every dollar you actually spend in a local business, it has a $7 economic impact.
Wow.
Yeah, think about that.
How does that work?
You have, you know, depending, but many businesses have local supply chains,
Yep.
right? Buy goods and services from other businesses.
Yep.
They hire people.
Yep.
They have local insurance. They hire local security. They have local garbage disposal.
Gotcha.
You know, they may hire local, patrols, security patrols. So all those things, then those employees of those other businesses and the employees of your business go forth and consume.
Right.
They buy shoes, they buy socks, they
Yeah.
buy the movies, they get bowling. And then, so that whole, again, that pebble in the pond has that echoing effect within your economy. If you shop on Amazon, doesn't happen. We don't have an Amazon distribution center here.
Gotcha.
If you go over to the States, it doesn't have that impact. It has that impact over in Sioux, Michigan. So, you know, so keeping your dollars local as best you can
Right.
is strong, which we hope goes to lead more entrepreneurs to take the risk,
Right.
to fill those service gaps that we're seeing here in the community. It takes time, but you know, that's the role that we need to have. That's the role that we try to communicate out to the general public as a chamber.
That's really fascinating. The idea that single dollar has this magnification impact. There's all these other people in the community, everyday average Canadians, who benefit from that single commercial transaction. And I think a lot of times we don't think about that when we're going through our day. We step outside of our house, get into our car, whatever, and then we're driving down the street and we're like, okay, am I going to go spend $1 at one of the big multi-billion-dollar fast food chains? Or am I going to go to sort of like a locally owned mom and pop shop sort of family restaurant and then support my community that way?
Mm-hmm.
I know that living here, I've done both. It's just generally not something like I haven't sat down and thought about all the different parties that benefit from stuff like that. But it's very fascinating. I think, yeah, it's definitely something that's worth acknowledging.
Yeah, and it's not to say that large corporates don't have an economic benefit to community because they hire locally, right? I mean,
Of course.
they have their employees. They may not have a local supply chain, but it still has economic benefit. And the impact, that economic multiplier of $1 to $7 is maybe $1 to $2.50 or $1 to $3. So it
Right.
still has an impact, but is not as great as investing your consumer dollars in a locally owned business. Let me just go travel down a little bit more of a path on filling the service gaps, because here's a great opportunity for Sault Ste. Marie. One, obviously it's lifestyle, right? Everybody will talk about that. The other is cost of living, even despite the fact that, you know, the cost to live in a metropolitan area like Toronto, Kitchener-Waterloo, you know, those areas, the Golden Horseshoe, London, Kitchener, those corridors, they're expensive. Even though the housing prices have dropped, they're going to come back. This is not a permanent thing, right? I mean, and housing and the cost of living has dropped a little bit here in Sault Ste. Marie. Obviously, that's offset, though, by rising interest costs. But the thing is, you can still get on a plane and be in downtown Toronto in an hour and 15 minutes. You can go to the airport 20 minutes before your flight and get through security.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
Good
luck with that.
So there's great benefits as people start to rethink priorities in life, right? So you've heard about the Great Resignation. Well, It's actually not a resignation. It's a redevelopment of how employees view their contribution to a business, to their job, to their community, but also to their personal well-being. We're seeing a massive change in that. And there's a great opportunity for Sault Ste. Marie to attract entrepreneurs to this area, because we do have a good lifestyle. We have good broadband. You know, we have connectivity. It's not perfect at times once you start to get out Beside that, we're building greater diversity in our community, which means that there's more ethnic culture to experience and enjoy, more ethnic foods to enjoy, and that in turn also attracts a different kind of entrepreneur. So as you start to build, your community attractiveness, you'll be able to fill those service gaps with more entrepreneurs, and then those entrepreneurs want to belong to community. Right? They want to belong to a community. They want to give back to the community. Just as, we started talking about those 4 segments. Whether they're in any of those 4 segments, we have a place for them here in Sault Ste. Marie, and that can be extremely attractive. The big thing for us now is to make sure that we have labor force.
Right.
That's the big thing for us. As you build that entrepreneurial base, we need to be able to supply human resources.
Earlier in the show, you made a comment about building sort of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, building sort of a culture of entrepreneurship in the community. And when you mentioned that, a question went through my mind in terms of like, what in your view would be the way, like the process that we could foster a community culture like that, and a sort of like an entrepreneurship energy in the community, if you want to call it that. And before you answer, I can tell you a little bit about my background to give you some context. Where, I went to, prior to law school, my undergraduate degree was at the University of Waterloo. And as you might already know, that university has a reputation for innovation. It has a reputation for pushing the boundaries of where we're at in terms of cutting edge science and technology and that kind of thing. But beyond science and technology, I find that, at least when I went many years ago, and I imagine it's still like this today, the idea of entrepreneurship, creating a business, building up something new, whether it was in science and technology or in some other industry, it was just sort of in the air. It was all around us. It was something that students enjoyed talking about with each other, connecting about, building friendships around. There's this excitement around, we're going to create something new, start a company, build something, rather than what you find at a lot of educational institutions where you're sort of just being, I guess, prepared for a lifetime of, clocking in and clocking out at a 9-to-5 job, which I guess works for some people. But as we were just talking about, this, as far as the Sault Ste. Marie community is concerned right now in its economic growth stage that it's at, there's a need for entrepreneurship. So I guess where I'm going is, how do we create that energy that we find in other communities, all small communities, by the way? I don't consider Waterloo to be a massive city. It's a relatively small community. I don't know what the exact population numbers are right now, but like living for as long as I lived in Waterloo, I was there it was a 5-year co-op program. So I lived in the city for like 5 years, and having gotten a taste of what it's like living in the Soo and also visiting the Soo over the course of many, many years, I find that the relative sizes of the two towns are comparable. So if it can be done in a place like Waterloo, building that energy, that vibe, at least as far as the university community is concerned, I imagine it could be done here. But I guess the question is how. And I guess the kinds of people that I'd want to ask are people like yourself.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll sort of frame it in some experience that I had. So for a short time, I moved from the commercial lending space, which is very traditional.
Right.
Very traditional. I used to, in small business and large commercial business, I always used to say to my clients, like, listen, I've got this brand new keyboard to my computer. It's got 2 buttons on it, and you can pick which one. No or no friggin' way. And that's your loan adjudication, right? So as an entrepreneur, you will probably get that, right? So there's that need to be able to source alternative types of capital that will help sort of foster that. And that's why we partner, and we'll be partnering again April 5th with the Northern Ontario Angels to present a piece of that alternative source of capital. We have the BDC in place. You have community credit unions. So finance is extremely important when you're looking to establish an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And you have to get as many stakeholders and partners around the table to realize it's not about standing in your ivory tower. You need to drop the change and think about how to work collaboratively. And I think in the 7 years that I've been here, we're starting to see some of that happen, where the Innovation Center now is partnering with the college or the university. Industry is partnering with the college and the university.
Amazing.
Or, the municipality, it needs to come along a little bit quicker.
Okay.
In terms of, managing red tape and fostering internally a more entrepreneurial system as well. So you have your external entrepreneurial ecosystem, but you also need to have an intrapreneurial ecosystem, meaning that you need entrepreneurs within your traditional 9-to-5 organization, right, to think differently. So that takes leadership.
Right.
And that really comes from the leadership. And then you need exactly what you're talking about at Kitchener-Waterloo. You need that kind of catalyst. So the university really became that catalyst. And oddly enough, I just had this conversation with Ozma at Algoma University, the chancellor and their chair, Mario Turco, about when you take a look at what they've done over the last few years in partnering to offer different kinds of programs, securing funding for research chairs, because research is absolutely critical to driving the advanced entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? You need the research. You need the right kind of agreements with the researcher to own the intellectual property. So there is benefit to the university or the college. There's agreements that happen, but you give the researcher the ability to experience the enhanced economic wealth from owning the tech or the intellectual property, right? It's just not, even though you're using research facilities at a university or a college, the result is trying to drive commercialization of intellectual property.
That's brilliant.
And Canada's not good at that. It's not just Sault Ste. Marie. Canada is not good at that. And you're seeing now, even in some of the spaces right now with CRTC around podcasting and internet, regulations that are really detrimental to building space in this digital format, right? Whether it's arts and culture or social media or news, because of the rules around Canadian content and what you are seeing is the migration of those entrepreneurs to the US.
That's terrible.
It is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And, I have a son who's an IT guy, and he's in Manhattan, New York. I couldn't help it. He just said, that's as far away from my father as I can get. I don't know. so he's down there. I got one in Grand Prairie, and I got one in, New York, Manhattan. We have my stepson down in Sarnia, but, but there's very different spaces, right? So we talk a little bit about the money part. We talk about the research part, but then, I always say, my philosophy is kind of like marketing. By the time you're sick of the message, your audience is just starting to hear it.
Wow.
So you can't give up, right? You can't give up. And so you just got to keep the message going, right? And at the end, and sometimes when you get older,
yeah,
and I'm no spring chicken, I'm at that stage. Sometimes you wake up in the morning, you swing your legs over the side of the bed and you go like, man, okay, I got this. Yeah. I got it. Yeah. I'll get through the day. I know what I got to do. I've heard the message probably 5,000 times, but I'm going to deliver it one more time. So those, you need that communication, right?
Yeah.
And then you need what I talked about earlier on, the general public needing to know and understand what entrepreneurship means,
right?
And how it's achieved, right? And how it's supported. So you need community to be able to respect what an entrepreneur is going through. And when you live in communities like large industrial, or single town employers, that's hard. That's a hard message, right? So you just got to keep it going. You need the college and the university to engage. And you got two amazing things going on. You've got Algoma Steel investing in the new ARC technology, and it's technology based. The supply of it's not going to be all from Sault Ste. Marie, but a large component of that is being supplied by businesses in Sault Ste. Marie, which means they have to up their game, right? So then they can go to the college and the university as long as they have capacity and say, hey, listen,
Right.
I need this, or I need these employees. Can you build a course for me? Now, there's a lot of regulation around post-secondary education, but you got to be creative. A college can be a little bit more flexible, but also can private colleges, right? A university takes a little bit longer.
Right.
But Algoma U is starting to do a great job in building that capacity. And that's when I said to Asma, you need to model this after Waterloo, right? And then think about how we can develop an incubator like Communitech, scaled down, obviously, but also understanding that ecosystem in Kitchener-Waterloo took, well, now it's 50 years, over 50 years to build.
Took a long time.
It takes a long time, right? So, but you can't give up. And our role as leaders is to make sure we have a succession plan in place, right? That we've got somebody else that can take the reins when we decide we're out of energy and I just can't take the message one more time.
Right.
So, that's part of our role. And that's why, we really want to make sure that we're building capacity in the young leadership, the new leaders of Sault Ste. Marie. So Kitchener-Waterloo takes 40 or 50 years, right? And then we need to be able to make sure that as we, as leaders, are building that succession plan, right, for the future leaders in our community and making sure that they have the buy-in to what we're trying to accomplish in the long term. So, we have our Strive Young Professionals group, right, which is a small group of very like-minded individuals that think about the future of Sault Ste. Marie. And we need to make sure that we're cultivating those young people into understanding what is a community, what's a business community, what's the private sector, what's entrepreneurship, what are the Northern Ontario Angels, what does it mean to support women in business and women's leadership, what does it mean to advance on economic reconciliation. So we need to make sure that those things are happening so that they can take the reins and continue to build that entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now, when we take a look and talk about entrepreneurs and where do you source entrepreneurs, obviously right now there's a great deal of focus on immigration, right? Bringing new immigrants to Canada. And as we start to diversify our own culture, we'll be attractive to new immigrants to Sault Ste. Marie. But we also have to understand potentially the fastest path to building a stronger entrepreneurial community is within our Indigenous populations.
Right.
They obviously understand us from a cultural perspective. They've lived in it long enough. They've had their own culture suppressed. But I think that also gives us a tremendous opportunity to embrace what that means for the future of Sault Ste. Marie.
Right.
Fastest growing youth population. Get them engaged, right? They're going to be learning traditions that led to a lot of discoveries through colonization. We lost a lot of that. When you look at time immemorial and you think about survival in the northern environment, it takes a lot of ingenuity.
Right.
Science North is here until I think the beginning. Well, they might have just wrapped up with Indigenous Ingenuity Display. And what a great way to represent. And people don't think, when you think about constructing a home, it's all modern technology. Like, well, no, simply it was branches and tree bark potentially, or frozen snow, or hides.
Yeah.
And thermodynamics, right? If it's minus 40 outside and you're living in a teepee, how do you efficiently use the heat? And it's amazing to see some of the systems that are built there. So embracing, our Indigenous communities, history, culture, focusing on economic reconciliation will also bring us a great path to building a stronger entrepreneurial ecosystem. And from that perspective, we're totally unique in Northern Ontario, in Sault Ste. Marie. We're totally unique. And I think that can offer, a great opportunity as entrepreneurs become more social minded, right? And we talk about social purpose. We talk about social profit. Those things, we're seeing those new young generations of entrepreneurs thinking differently, approaching business differently. And that can only, bode well for a place like Sault Ste. Marie because you have connectivity to land. You still have connectivity to global markets very easily. 4-hour drive, you're just outside of Detroit, one of the largest economic engines in North America. And we need to start thinking about how to take advantage of those things by building a stronger entrepreneurial community.
It's interesting what you talk about economic reconciliation and the sort of untapped opportunities and skills and resources that exist in the Indigenous communities, because, you know, it's just so relevant to a recent episode we recorded. It's as I speak, it's currently in the editing phase, but depending on when a viewer is listening to this current episode, that other episode might already have been released. But we interviewed Grace Swain, who's a Indigenous entrepreneur, very talented and intelligent and enthusiastic young person who, you know, despite being more than a decade younger than me, I feel like I learned a lot from her during that podcast episode that we had. So, you know, and now you bring that point up as well. It feels very, very relevant to the discussions that we've been having on the show. And you didn't even know about that. Like we haven't had any discussions in advance about Grace or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I found that very fascinating. Another thing that was going through my mind when you were explaining this stuff to me, in terms of like building that overall culture of entrepreneurship in the community, I imagine that many listeners who are tuning into an episode like this, even if they have dreams and aspirations about starting their own business one day and radically changing their lives and their financial situations, the thought that's probably going through a lot of people's minds is like, okay, well, all of this sounds great in theory, but I'm sitting in a position where I'm trying to figure out how I'm supposed to manage my household budget just to get my rent covered, my car payments covered, you know, paying off the credit card, all this stuff. How am I ever supposed to find the means to open up a storefront, you know, pay a commercial landlord for a commercial piece of land, hire other people, you know, be responsible for someone else's wages, even, you know, given that being responsible for your own wages is hard enough, you know, there are things that people like, practical barriers. Now, you know, I'm, of course, although mindful of these things, I've generally, you know, whether it's giving advice to a client or trying to decide my own, you know, economic journey, I've tried to focus on a sort of a solutions-oriented approach where I'm like, okay, yes, these are very real obstacles that need to be overcome, but I'd rather focus on how I'm going to overcome it rather than the seemingly impossible nature of it. And going back to what you were talking about earlier in the episode, where you mentioned, you know, how is it that some of these small business owners are going to deal with the rising cost of living, the rising cost of wages, and that sort of thing? Because, you know, in my mind, I look at that and I'm like, well, small business owners, most of them are basically in very, very similar financial circumstances as everybody else. You know, you're sort of like, okay, I'm going to pay my commercial landlord. I'm going to pay the tax man. I'm going to pay my staff. I'm going to pay my supplier. How much is really left over? For some small business owners, what's left over is a negative number and they're going into debt that month. And maybe in order to afford that first few months worth of rent on their storefront, and in order to afford to buy the inventory that they need, they might have taken out a loan. So they have these loan payments that need to be made. There's interest on the loans. And, you know, I've heard a lot of perspectives on this where some people would be like, and I think this is sort of like a narrow way of looking at it, but nonetheless, people do hold this view. They'll say, well, if you can't pay your staff a living wage, you shouldn't be in business. Okay, true enough. Let's close down all the businesses that can't afford to pay their staff a living wage. And I imagine we're just going to be left with the big multi-billion-dollar corporations, and you're pretty much going to see the end of the mom and pop shop if we were to do that. Now, obviously, that's a sweeping generalization, and we have hundreds of thousands of businesses across Canada of all kinds of different sizes, and people make it work. I think the idea, everyone agrees, myself included, that all businesses should pay a living wage. But the fact that a lot of them can't seems to me to point to a larger economic problem in this country. Then I don't pretend to have the solution. I mean, like, there are all kinds of politicians out there that are pretending that they've got, everything figured out, and they're gonna build a future that we can all love. I mean, that's what they all claim. But I think, I just don't know where the solution might rest. But I do, when I'm hearing you explain the detailed, sort of granular, nuanced steps that need to be taken to build a culture of entrepreneurship in a city that could really, really benefit from it. To me, it sounds like you've really thought it through at a level that just I had not even considered. So that's, it's a lot for me to digest, and it's a lot for our audience to process. It's like, okay, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's look at it from the fact that, using that Kitchener-Waterloo example of 50 years of growth and innovation and effort that's been put into building that community the way that it is today, and how that same path could look like for the Soo, and look like, for, Algoma being the big university here, how they could have a similar impact, a similar future in the community. It's all, for me, there's so much, both like a certain level of uncertainty, like where is it all going to go? And at the same time, that very uncertainty for me also inspires a certain level of like excitement, and I guess that's the entrepreneur in me, right? Like when things are uncertain, and when things aren't just like, when I'm like, oh no, like what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to this community? How are we going to see a brighter future? That yes, there's a level of anxiousness associated with that. I think anyone would feel that way, but just as I think about it, like I literally have a smile on my face right now, because I'm thinking about all the possibilities.
I don't say this to many people, but I've lost money investing in small business. I started or bought a small business and lost its main client, and I lost money on it. That's the risk, right? And you've got a lot of adventure seekers out there that jump from airplanes or do heli skiing, but an entrepreneur is probably the most dangerous thing you will ever do in life, right? Because of the very things that you have just said. So there are support mechanisms out there that you can get within a community. So I talk about the Millworks Entrepreneurial Center, or the Community Futures, Community Development Corporation that's down on Queen Street. They have people there that can give you advice, and it comes from years of being either an entrepreneur or years of dealing with entrepreneurs and understanding the journey. So, and it is a journey. And, it's different to start a tech company than it is to start a small retail shop, or to start a bakery,
right,
or a furniture manufacturing, right? So one, you should have a passion for it. End of story. If you don't have a passion for it, just don't do it,
Yeah.
Just put the X in the box and say, see you later. Because you got to have a passion for it, because you will live, breathe, eat, and sleep the existence of your small business.
Oh, I know what that's like.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll have, days where you're as high as a kite because you've just landed a deal, and there's days where you're going to wake up and go, okay, how the hell am I going to pay my employees today?
Right.
I have like $5 in my account. So what do? You either liquidate an asset. If you own a home, you leverage any equity you've got in your home. You might have to cash out an RSP. I've dealt with entrepreneurs that have cashed their RSP, to put their retirement future on the line to ensure that they could pay their employees. But those are the sacrifices, and commitments that entrepreneurs make. And so it's measuring those things. And sometimes, as I say to my boys, the thing that my father taught me, a British engineer, so everything had to be mathematically aligned, right?
Right.
So you put your you put your priorities, you score them on level of significance. You measure, I can stay in my job as an engineer, or I can go out and be my own engineering company. And you measure your risks versus return. And you also have to think about your risks as they're associated within your first 3 years, and what do the returns look like in 10 to 15 years. You really got to start to think that way. The challenge with entrepreneurs is you're thinking about the next minute, right? When you're starting up, it's all about the next minute. You're thinking 10, 15 years. I can't even get my head wrapped around that. That's why it's so important to have community. That's why it's so important to have mentors in your community, other entrepreneurs that you can go to. And that's what the chamber facilitates too, right? I mean, it puts you together with other business people. It puts you together with other stakeholders in the community that can add, perspective, or they might actually have supports, or they might have an opportunity. So, it's great. One of our board members, Ian Grant, just moved up from Toronto and purchased ATS, Algoma Technology Services. And I love him for this because we were sitting in a meeting. We sat in a meeting with Algoma. They were traveling down a path, and he goes, "Oh, cybersecurity. I want to talk to you because this is what we do." We were sitting in a meeting with Algoma Steel talking about what they're doing. He goes, "Hey, do you source your security and technology locally?"
Right.
And they go, "Well, I don't know. Are you a company?" He goes, "Dad, give me your number. I'm going to give you a call." So you got to have the hustle, right? I mean,
you got to have the hustle.
You got to have the hustle. You can't just open a door. And this is one of the biggest challenges. People just think they're going to hang a shingle or put it out on the door and business is going to come to them.
Doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work that way because it's competitive. And this is one of the things, in the roles that we do when we're doing a lot of advocacy work with government is we need to be competitive. We need to think about how we're establishing Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, as a competitive entity to attract investment, not just external investment, from investment from within. And, because people make those, they make those calculations. If I'm going to take $100,000, I can put it here. If I'm going to take $100,000, I'm going to start a new business. I'm going to live the life that we just described for 3 years. But over here, I might have $100,000 earning 5%. But over here, I'm watching TV and eating popcorn. Over here, I'm living my dream.
Right.
So those are the kind of things that you need to do. But you really need to, one, understand your community, what's available to you in your community, and go to those resources, other than your traditionals, which is your banker, lawyer, and your accountant, right? I mean, those are your three traditional pillars.
Right.
But there's other sources, right? So, and the biggest thing as well, I think, in terms of being an entrepreneur is never be so scared that you don't ask. Don't ask for the business. Don't ask for the money. Don't ask for the opportunity. Don't ask for the meeting. You have to ask those things. So the amount of resilience that you see in entrepreneurs, and I'll say Canadian entrepreneurs, because Canada is pretty risk adverse. We are. We tend to have, when you take a look at entrepreneurship in the States, we have a very, very different approach, right? And that's kind of why my keyboard joke at the beginning of being a traditional lender and then working in the non-traditional space. Don't be afraid to ask for those things that you think are going to suit you better. Like if you need to take a loan, ask them for 3 months, no principal payments. If they say no, then you just go to the next one.
Right.
Or you go to the Business Development Bank of Canada, or you go to the Community Development Corporation. There's ways there. If you need substantial investment, there's the Northern Ontario Angels. Then there's always, just the naturals. You go to your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, your cousin, your nephew, anybody you can, right? It's just if they got blood flowing through their veins, you can ask them for cash, right?
Yeah.
So there's ways to bootstrap these things, but then you need to plan it out. You just can't do it by the seat of your pants, because the first question is from somebody who's going to lend you money is, okay, how are you going to repay me? What's the plan?
Right.
What are you going to use it for? What's the plan? And absolute transparency is key, but to have a plan is absolutely key.
Yeah.
At least a line of sight, right? So, when I was in the alternative side, we used to had a $12 million loan fund to put capital into fast-growing companies. And I had Southwestern Ontario, sort of Orange Sound down to Niagara and around. So very competitive environment.
Okay.
But really trying to highly structure loans to allow companies to drive working capital through the revenue cycle, but remove from that the risk associated with funding innovation out of working capital. So, you saw a lot of stuff, but that takes some very highly creative structuring. So you need to think about those things. You're not just going to think about, I'm going to go to a bank. It's going to be principal and interest. It's going to be
Right.
X number of this. Think about what you need and ask for it. It's really that simple. The worst thing is somebody's just going to say no, but you got to keep on going. And if they say no, say, who should I ask? Ask for that referral. And that's the hustle of an entrepreneur. So don't expect the door to be open. Don't expect business to come your way because you put a shingle out.
Yeah.
You got to go out there. You got to be hungry for it. And, I'm always of the philosophy, listen, if it fails, it fails. Don't kill yourself over it, right? I mean, it's just going to happen. And I wish we had more of that kind of philosophy in Canada like it is in the States. Like in the States, if you've had a business and it's failed, a lot of funders just look at that. What did you learn?
Right.
And how are we going to do it right next time?
Right.
Here, if you fail and have to declare bankruptcy, it's like you're a pariah, right?
Nobody wants to touch it.
That's a wrong way to think because who knows what could have happened? Even in my own case, right? I mean, I had one supplier and, the financial market fell out, like just gone. Anybody I was doing with basically shut their doors. So what are you going to do? You're just going to shut your door, you pick up your socks and you move on. But you can't let that, I think, put you down into a place where you're not going to try again. And you just got to keep on going because maybe you did learn something. Me, I never went back into that business because it just didn't exist anymore, right? And then I found my calling in other places. And, the chamber world being one of them. But there's always a way to work it out, I think. And you just, don't hide yourself in a hole.
Yeah.
Get back out there. Just go for it. If you've had a passion for it, just keep going. And you can eventually find some money somewhere. It's out there. We're Canadians are sitting on a mountain of cash, like a mountain of cash, especially as the demographics start to do what they do, where you're going to have people inheriting wealth from the previous generation, right?
Right.
And so there's always opportunity. There's a place to source it. There's resources local to help you, hold your hand, and to help you through that journey. The only thing I think that as a community we ask is at some point in time when you're successful, just share it back to the community.
Right.
Sponsor a hockey team. Sponsor our business awards. Sponsor, an opioid addiction counseling center or whatever. Just give back. And 99% of entrepreneurs do exactly that, right?
That's
Which
really
is a
inspiring.
beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I had a question. How did you get through what I imagine was a very emotionally difficult and emotionally jarring experience of that business failure that you mentioned earlier? Because I think, personally, I think that failure is a part of entrepreneurship. I think you will see times in your company where, like I mentioned earlier, there are months where you are negative cash flow. You might have negative cash flow for 2 or 3 months in a row, and you might be thinking to yourself, is this business even worth having? Is it going to turn around, and am I going to see positive cash flow in the future months, or is this problem going to even get worse? And then should I close this business? That's when you're in the midst of a business. And then maybe there might be something that brings about the complete end of that business, like what you were talking about earlier with that experience that you had. So yes, dealing with the financial ramifications of a situation like that is one kind of skill. But I think another distinct kind of skill that's important for entrepreneurs to have is trying to navigate the emotions that can happen to any normal, healthy-minded human being when they're in a situation like that. So my question to you is, how did you deal with that?
Well, you really rely on the people that are close to you, right?
Right.
And I'll be honest with you, a lot of it was because I was involved in the Chamber of Commerce in Sarnia at that time. I was on the board of directors, did 2 terms with them, was very close to the business community, and they get it, right? So, again, just be open. They can walk you through it. They can talk, and then you just go back and reassess. Reassess your priorities in life. At the time, I had 2 boys. My wife had passed away, and I said, where are you gonna put your energy and time, and where are you gonna focus? So I went back into the banking world, but I took that experience. It was interesting. I mean, it's a great it's a great thing to sort of go back and gain some perspective here, because I rarely talk about it. Rarely.
Well, I appreciate you
Rarely
sharing
talk
it.
about it. And I took that experience and then I applied it to what I did as a commercial banker, because I had some workouts I had to do with some folks. And honestly, those people walking into my office and saying, we're done. We're finished. We can't do this. And they owed us money. So the thing is, take a deep breath, guys. Understand. Let's take a good hard look at your situation. There's ways that we can work it out. And let's take our time on this. Obviously I have to go through some steps, and this is what these steps look like. What we're going to try and do is we're going to try to get you a solution that works for you. And it's achievable.
Right.
As long as you work together with those folks. But if they had a hardline traditional banker that from the age of 18 has never done anything except work for a bank, it would have been, I think, a horrible experience for them. And, so you seek out, you've already probably talked to your accountant, your lawyer, and your banker before as you come to that decision, and your banker may be the very last one. But, ask for that understanding when you're in those kind of situations, and talk to people who who have either gone through it or had those struggles. Because I guarantee you, every entrepreneur has lived that dream, and there's experience that you need to be tapping into. The other thing is, I think, never, ever be ashamed, because you're probably 1 out of 10 people who's given it a try.
Right.
And that's pretty admirable.
Yeah.
Like I look at what's happened to our small business community in the last 3 years. And especially if you're in the food service or accommodation sector. And the admiration I have for these people is unbelievable, because they survived. They changed their business models as best they can. None of them made money, like in those particular tourism, music, arts and culture, anything that was high touch, right? They didn't make any money. They could maybe pay the rent, but what did they do? Talk to your landlords. I've talked to many entrepreneurs, my members, who said, we just worked with our landlords. Patient capital, right? Patient capital is what it's called. We'll wait till you're on the right side.
Right.
And then we can work out how you're going to how you're going to repay. But we're going to walk this path with you. Because most of the landlords here are entrepreneurs.
Right.
And they've been down this, through all the ups and downs.
Right.
In Sault Ste. Marie. So it's just to be open and don't try and hide anything. Don't feel ashamed. You should be proud. You gave it a try. And, sometimes that's just the way things work out. I think if you have that perspective in all things in life,
right,
you'll end up, I think, a more whole individual, but you'll also continue on with a community around you, right? And you won't be isolated. So, it is a risk. It is a risk. You may fail, but don't be ashamed of that. Learn from it, and, take advantage of those who are around you to help support you through it.
I was thinking about something you said earlier with the, power of asking, right? Because if you don't ask, the answer is no. You've just said no to yourself. You've closed the door on yourself before you even get an opportunity to pursue a particular, advantage for your business. And as you were telling me that, I thought about a negotiation that we were involved in at the law firm years ago. This was before the pandemic. I think probably sometime in, if I had to say, early 2018. Yeah, so about 5 years ago. We were in the midst of changing office spaces. We needed a significantly larger space to deal with the growth that we were seeing. We were hiring more employees. We were getting more and more clients. Our office that we were operating out of just wasn't going to cut it for us. So we were talking to this person who was going to be our new landlord. Well, we were still negotiating the deal. And it was actually my business partner that made the bold move of asking for something that I wouldn't have asked for because I thought it was too big of an ask. She said, to the landlord, what do you think about giving us 6 months early occupancy? So for anyone who isn't familiar, I see you smiling because you probably know what that term means, but for anyone who isn't familiar with what the term early occupancy means in a commercial leasing agreement, basically means that your move-in date, your official move-in date, and the day that the rent checks are due is listed as a certain specific date on the contract. But in reality, you move in earlier than that and you don't pay rent for the early occupancy period. Now, oftentimes this is something that is negotiated so that small business owners are not put in a position where they are paying rent at two different offices at the same time. If it takes a full month or so for you to move your things from one office to the next, you want access to both locations, but you don't want to be paying at both locations. So it helps commercial tenants make transitions from one place to another. And normally an early occupancy period is quite short. It accommodates for moving and stuff like that. So 6 months of early occupancy would seem quite silly, at least in my mind. But what I didn't know at the time was I was sort of closing the door on myself by not wanting to even ask for something like that. Now, my business partner at the time was much more bold in that regard, and she would just ask for whatever. And her attitude was more so consistent with yours, which is like, well, if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. And if you ask and they say no, well, they've just said no, you haven't lost anything.
Yeah. But it's interesting about that, is probably, you may or may not have realized at some point in time, she said to herself, if I was the landlord, what do I want? I want a tenant.
Yeah.
I want a tenant so I can have 90% occupancy or 80% occupancy or 40% occupancy, because if you're a tenant and I've got 40% occupancy, now I can bring people in and show this place off. Like, look at this. I've got this business in here. Yeah. So it's starting to think about being on the other side of that table, knowing what you want. Yeah. But really, what does the buyer want? And it's interesting.
So the landlord ended up giving us the 6 months early occupancy complimentary. And I was just like, what the? This is just so shocking to me. Like it seemed too good to be true, but it was true, and it wasn't too good to be true. It was unexpected. And I thought about it for a while, just exactly what you said. It's like, well, the landlord must be doing this because it's good for their own self-interest in some way. It's business at the end of the day. People are looking out for their own skin. And the conclusion that I came to at the time was exactly what you just said. That landlord was looking at the bigger picture. At the time, there wasn't like a lot of tenants showing interest in that particular building. But getting a pretty successful law firm like ours with a relatively large workforce and a well-known brand, putting their sign up in front of the building, that could go a long way for getting some other tenants interested in the building. And that's exactly the effect that it had, because after we moved in, we did see a number of the other units getting quickly filled up. So I think the landlord was looking at the big picture when he gave us that deal, which I thought was overly generous, but in fact was very, very strategic for him to do. So, I think for our advice to our listeners out there, if you're trying to start up your small business and you're worried that what you're asking for from a supplier or a landlord or a collaborator is just seems like it's asking for too much, look at what that other person could benefit from in giving you that. see things from their perspective. And it may be that you can come up with a win-win situation that results in you receiving something that you thought was maybe too much to ask for, but turns out it was totally reasonable.
Yeah, it's a great point, and you're seeing some trends now in customer service or customer experience.
Yeah.
Right, and how important it is to make sure you're putting yourself in the customer's shoes, and that is so incredibly difficult for somebody who's starting a business, right? Because at the end of the day, you're thinking, how do I pay the mortgage, right? How do I feed my kids? How do I do this? You're just thinking about all these things about yourself. Sometimes the last thing to come into your perspective is what your purchaser wants, what your consumer wants. And it can take a lot of discipline to understand what they want, and don't, those expectations, you're never going to close a sale the first time. There's all kinds of stats. You need to make 5 calls.
Yeah.
You need to make 10 calls. You need to make 20. It depends on what the sector's purchasing behaviors are, and you need to know that.
Yeah.
But you also have to understand, and the best tool for an entrepreneur in looking for a customer is to ask questions. Not tell them about your business, tell them about your product, tell them about your features, tell them about all the little things that you do. Ask them questions.
Yeah.
It really is amazing. I've been in the sales game in various forms, and the last thing you focus on is yourself.
Yeah.
And you focus totally on the person that you're dealing with, whether they're a gatekeeper, and they're protecting the actual buyer.
Right.
But you still need to ask those questions, and that's, the success that I had in banking. I came onto a portfolio, I think it was, book was about 17 million. Within 3 years, I had it up to 65 million.
Wow.
And that was really simply because I went to those businesses and learned about them. And you just asked the questions, what's this? What's that? Why do you do this? What's that person doing? How did you get into this business? Are your kids going to take over? All those things. It has absolutely nothing to do with you, except you're getting information, right? You're getting the ability to communicate now with a prioritization to the valued relationship with the buyer, right? Stop thinking about yourself. Stop thinking about your product. Start thinking about your customer. And it puts you in an incredibly powerful position than your competitors. Because if you understand those needs, you are able then to have that conversation eventually, that brings business into your door. So there's, and those are kind of things that as a new entrepreneur, you have to learn. And that's why it's so important to communicate to people who have been there, done that, learn how they drove business, how they did these things. And, you can't win them all. That's just the nature of the game, right? So again, if you don't win it, pack your bags, make sure you understand, you critique yourself.
Right.
And figure it out, right? And, maybe it's a controllable thing, or maybe it's a non-controllable thing, because there'll be things in your business life that you just can't control.
Right.
Like I couldn't control the fact that I'd never be able to get financing again because the whole financial market nobody was doing anything, right? Because there was literally no money, and no risk taking. So can you control that? No.
You can focus on the things you have control over.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Understand what you can't control and focus on those things that you can control. And when you start to learn those disciplines, I think that you will take your stress notch down, significantly, right?
Right. Actually, one of the things I want to tell you about Rory was there was a previous episode of the podcast where I was talking with a guest about the incredible opportunity for software entrepreneurship, specifically in the Sioux. And one of the stories I'd mentioned, I don't want to belabor it and get all into it again because I've already said it in a previous episode, but I'll give you the quick version. My brother, who lives at Yonge and Dundas in Toronto, as anyone who's familiar with the GTA knows, that's basically like Canada's Times Square. He lives like a 3-minute walk from over there. He lives in this really nice condo, and he purchased the fastest internet that was available for that condo. And he told me that apparently the internet that I get here in the Soo is actually much faster than his. So I thought about that for a moment, and I was like, if we have an internet infrastructure here in the Soo that's actually faster than and rivals some of the big cities out there in Ontario, why then do we not yet have a more vibrant software entrepreneurship community? You know, like when you think about it, if you're someone who is determined to build a multi-million-dollar company, software is the way to do it. You know, I mean, yeah, there are a lot of great industries and there's a lot of great ways to become wealthy and successful. Yes. But if you're talking about like something that has a traditionally low barrier to entry, low startup costs, what do you really need? You need a laptop, you need a fast internet connection, and you need some skills. And let's say you don't have skills in, you know, building apps and building software solutions. Okay, there are free YouTube videos that will teach you those things. So again, low cost to get started. So, you know, one of the things I thought would be really exciting, and maybe this is happening to some extent in the Soo, you would know better than me, but one of the things I thought would be really exciting for the Soo is some sort of software incubator or software group of software companies that could come together and work in a communal sort of office space where, you know, we've seen the rise of these sort of shared office spaces where you get a whole bunch of different companies all on the same floor and that kind of thing, and they've each got their own sort of little rooms and stuff. So if we had something that attracted software entrepreneurship in the Soo, where the whole building, the whole floor was just set up with the best internet possible, and you have all these different little private meeting spaces for people to collaborate and like draw their ideas on whiteboards and stuff like that. And maybe, you know, I'm not unaware of the fact that we have, you know, the Millworks Center for Entrepreneurship that seems like it's sort of creating a space for that. But what I don't know, what I am unsure of, is whether or not we have a software and technology focused place for entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs to go and sort of like launch the Soo into the next century of innovation and really put the city on the map. You know, I think that would be really cool, and maybe it's happening, maybe it's not. Like maybe you could tell us more about what you know in that side of things.
Well, you know, I think it's a tremendous opportunity, absolutely. But, you know, when we talk about developing an ecosystem like that, we talk about Kitchener-Waterloo, we talk about 50 years. But again, you know, when it started, everything kind of moved at a certain pace. And now that pace has escalated, you know, I mean, everything probably moves 10 times faster than it did, you know, in 1960.
Right.
So we're in a place where we have opportunity. We do have some infrastructure that's required, it like the internet, capacity and broadband. The challenge is, you know, we haven't fostered at the university or the college and post-secondary that kind of research component that I mentioned earlier.
Right. That
is starting to happen. And I think there is a bit of an awakening around the opportunity to have, you know, a software-focused innovation center, if you like. And I know that the university has started to lay the groundwork for that. So when we were speaking with Ozma just last week, she had mentioned things around that, right? And there's, you know, obviously there's different markets that you can take advantage of that you may have some speciality in as a community.
Right.
So you need to be able to leverage something that exists to, as opposed to starting something that's totally greenfield, right?
Right.
And because that you will actually need to attract. And you can only do that through having the human resources available to you. So if you have the inability to attract the human resources, you won't attract the entrepreneur. That's why it's critical that post-secondary starts to get into this space, right?
Right.
Starts to think about the research dollars, building their computer science, their computer engineering, their business and economics courses to build out that capacity to attract the entrepreneurs or to grow them locally.
Right.
And then give them a place to be. So there is conversations in the community now about doing just that. When you take a look at our conversations around the Millworks, it is more traditional, you know, hot desks, more traditional businesses,
Right.
consulting, some product development, if you like, in that space with the supporting mechanisms. Then there is the Sault Ste. Marie Innovation Center, which is doing great things around agricultural innovation, and their was it geomatics that they have.
Okay.
Using data collection, right? So trying to leverage those different things. So the Innovation Center is doing some things in space. And I know Peter there has really been talking about and considering how do you then move that from its current location into something that's more desirable by that sector, right? So, I mentioned my son's in Manhattan. He's a software engineer, and he's one of those, part of one of those companies that is, the high growth, the hockey stick growth, or the gazelle, whatever you want to call them. But there was a quick ramp up for them, and then they stabilized, right? So they didn't get caught like some of the other organizations who, brought on 10,000, technology folks, and then had to let them all go,
right?
When they couldn't scale for the future,
right?
But still, you have to have the ability to make sure that you've got access to the human resources, and you do that through your education system or by attracting immigrants or, economic reconciliation like we talked about,
right?
Or migrants from Southern Ontario, basically, right? And again, that's where, where you have to really think about, okay, well, what do we offer? There are some people that will not come to Sault Ste. Marie, but there's some people that are tired of the hustle and bustle.
Right.
They're tired of some of the risk that's associated with a large population. I was just saying to somebody the other day, the only thing you have to worry about in Sault Ste. Marie is somebody pushing you in front of a moose. There isn't a subway, right?
Yeah.
There isn't, so there's different lifestyle risks, but you can imagine, being able to, if you want, commune with nature as part of your job. I mean, sitting out in your backyard. I mean, you can buy properties here where the bush is right there.
Right.
If that's your thing, or, you want to go for a ride or a bike ride, or go for a boat ride or go for a skidoo or go skiing or go snowshoeing, or go cross country skiing, all that's available to you within literally 5 minutes.
Right.
Right. If not less. And, that can be really attractive because if you're a software engineer or, or developing software, the majority of your time is screen time.
Right.
Right. And you need to, for your own mental health and well-being, you need to get away from that.
Yeah.
And we talk about, so some of the trends that are happening in workplaces and the younger generations rethinking about the relationship they have with work.
Right.
And mental health and well-being is becoming a very, dominant subject in the employment circles, right? And in companies, right? That you need to take a break. You need to get away.
Right.
And, you talk about being, in Times Square in Toronto, right? And I know exactly what you're talking about. And I mean, coming and visiting back down to Toronto is just like the noise is
it's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
The lights and especially I remember going to my first conference after being through the pandemic, and it was sensory overload.
Yeah.
Like it really was, right? And it was amazing to be just surrounded by lights, noise, nonstop people. And you're kind of like, whew, I can hardly wait to be in my backyard.
Yeah.
And just, whoosh,
Yeah.
and then go back to work, because things, we're a very small team at the Chamber. It's just myself and Don.
Right.
We had an intern for a year. So we put a lot of hours in. It's a lot of screen time, a lot of connectivity, right? Managing programs and stuff. And it's great just to get up and walk into the backyard and just get some fresh air.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right? Just get the fresh air. And, I'm becoming a boater this summer. So, to be able to just take the time, jump on a boat and boom, just be on the water, or even just to be in a marina, and it takes you 5 minutes to get basically anywhere you want to be to experience these things, or if you want to go skiing, Search Mount's about a 40-minute drive. All those things are there without the busyness and the craziness. And that can be really attractive if you're an entrepreneur in the software space, to be able to focus,
Right.
to be able to focus. So to present those opportunities, I think, is a great future for Sault Ste. Marie, to connect that lifestyle, the health and well-being, to creating companies that can be global competitors, right?
Yeah.
And attracting then the workforce, the entrepreneurs. We're starting to develop more sophisticated money, as we talked about earlier, with the Northern Ontario Angels.
Yeah.
We have the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund Corporation that funds a lot of businesses. We have FedNor, which wants to involve themselves in some larger projects. So there's a lot of opportunity. The biggest thing is trying to get the message, right? Trying to get the message to those who would want to look at a different kind of lifestyle to develop there. And interesting enough, I was talking with somebody the other day about the potential of bringing an entrepreneur up north.
Right.
Because they've decided that it's too expensive in Toronto, because if you have high overheads for your lifestyle, you're going to have high overheads to pay in wages.
Yeah.
Right. It's economics 101.
Yep.
Right. So yeah, you may not earn as much here, but you'll definitely take more money home.
Yeah.
Right. And you'll have a healthier lifestyle at the end of the day. So I think it's a very attractive opportunity for Sault Ste. Marie. As again, we start to build those spaces, we start to think about what does an incubation or innovation center look like? How do you do what Communitech has done in Waterloo?
Right.
On a smaller community scale, don't get me wrong. But how do you create that environment that's going to bring those entrepreneurs here? I have to tell you a funny story, though.
Please.
Because, so my son in Manhattan, right? He's,
Okay.
Pandemic comes, they shut down the office, everybody goes home.
Okay.
So he was up visiting, about a year and a half ago, and they're in New York. So they're starting to get back to work and open up the office. And I'm saying, like, Devin, you gonna go back to work? And he goes, well, Dad, why would I want to go back to the office? They've got rid of the candy wall.
Yeah.
I said, excuse me? Yeah. They just like candy. You just go and help yourself and take whatever candy you want.
Yeah.
And then there's no more catered lunches.
Oh, no.
I'm like, what? You just pick up the phone and you just order whatever you want.
Yeah.
But, that's changed. Like, that place isn't even there anymore.
Right.
But the biggest thing is there's no longer going to be the barista. I'm like,
They just threw everything out the window.
They just went out the window, right? Because everything changed. And
Oh my gosh.
you're just like, okay, so you're not going to go back to the office because you're not being treated like like a princess, right? Just like,
Well, that's the new standard, I guess.
here I am, and I've been working for 40 years. I'm looking at my son going, I don't recall ever having any of those things, let alone the foosball and the pool table, right? It's like,
well, times have changed.
yeah. So yeah, time. But you're exactly right. I mean, as we joke about that, but that's what you have to look at, right?
Yeah.
Like, what does that workforce want?
Yeah.
And if you want to be in a big city, like that company's in Manhattan because they're close to big money.
Yeah,
right.
Of course.
Close to big money. Canada's not like that. We have a good venture capital system. It's not as good as it should be. The angel investment community here is pretty strong. We've talked about that. But there are other sources but our biggest challenge is when you get that gazelle, how do you get them financed in Canada? Even when you take a look at a company like Shopify,
Yep.
It's all US dollars. Yes, they're in Ottawa. Their biggest office is in the US.
Yeah.
And I want to say it's either Massachusetts or Missouri or something. I can't remember what it is. But, that's where you're going because the tax regimes are more beneficial. The appetite for risk is far higher than it is in Canada.
Right.
And you can go to very different jurisdictions. Like Boston will have a certain appeal to types of software industries where Texas may be something else, or the Silicon Valley will be something else, right? So the diversity is a little bit greater, right? So for us, when you look at it, the big ones: Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa,
right,
Vancouver, right, and that's in a pretty big country. So still opportunity, don't get me wrong, but we need to find that niche.
Yeah.
where you connect lifestyle to the gazelle, right? And how do you build that gazelle and provide the infrastructure? So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for this.
Oh, absolutely. You know, especially on social media these days, you see a lot of these sort of finance gurus, some of them very, very credible and legitimate and wise and knowledgeable. Some of them not so much. And they're selling this idea of this glamorous laptop lifestyle where you're scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and you see this person who's like, you know, would you like to live in Bali or like with your laptop and make money living in this gorgeous place? Or would you like to live in like this Caribbean island making money? Like usually you see stuff like that and you're like, that seems a little too good to be true, right? Like you look at it and you're like, you're skeptical. What I find exciting about what we're talking about is it's not totally necessary. If you're dreaming about this like laptop lifestyle of being in a beautiful nature environment and making money from your computer, you don't have to go all the way to Bali. You don't have to go find an island in the Caribbean. You can do that right here in Ontario by coming to a place like the Sault, which has just the most beautiful summers. And, winter has its own charm here. Now, obviously,
absolutely
poses its own challenges, but there's a charm to it. And you'll never be bored with the weather here. It'll be something that will, like you were talking about, getting you away from the screen when you need to be. And then when you need to be making money in front of the screen, you have that internet infrastructure and you have a community here that you can rely on. So it is that sort of like escape from the grind that you find in big cities. I tell you myself, for me, moving to the Sault was one of the best decisions I ever made, both personally and professionally. I honestly, I do not regret it for 1 second. So, if an entrepreneur like myself who has done the things that I've done in my career can feel that way about this community, I think there's a ton more people out there who can also feel the same way. Talking about what you were saying in terms of like building and fostering that energy, that entrepreneurial software focused energy, or it could be, a lot of different industries, but for the moment we were talking about software, and you made a couple of comments about how that's possible and slowly being done in sort of like the post-secondary level. And when you said that to me, I thought to myself, it can start earlier than that. It can start even at the high school level. And like Jason's about to graduate high school in a few months.
Yep.
And I guess what I wanted to ask you earlier when Rory made that comment was like, to what extent, if any, have you seen in your high school career an environment of a sort of entrepreneurship on the one side, but more specifically like technology and high skilled entrepreneurship in your high school experience here out in Northern Ontario?
That'd just be through co-op.
Through co-op.
Mainly through co-op, yeah, because you have more hands-on experience with many different businesses, whether it be where I'm working right now at the Legion,
right,
working as an electrician, doing all the wiring and stuff, commercial,
right,
or I was working last year at Tacoma Auto Electric, rebuilding alternators and starters.
Nice.
You get to meet a bunch of people from everywhere then too, because you deal with Saldan or with steel plant and stuff like that, so you get to meet other people and see what they do for a living.
So there is a program, there's some sort of academic infrastructure that's putting students in the community, in industry, and then giving them an opportunity to sort of explore what sort of businesses and skills they want to get into and that kind of thing.
Yep.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's, number one, that's awesome to see that you're doing that and you're learning those skills. But you understand the biggest thing is you understand that doing that is going to build a future for yourself, whatever that might look like. There was a great article in the McKinsey document called "There's No Such Thing as a Dead End Job."
Right.
Because you're always going to learn some kind of skill.
Right.
So that's awesome that this young man is picking up on those things.
I agree. There is no such thing as a dead end job.
Just to build on that, it's when you take a look at the future and the trajectory of business, doesn't matter what sector you're in, you're going to need software. You're going to need technology development. We can talk about, the labor shortages or how we've changed labor, you're going to need technology to fill those gaps, right? I mean, that's just the reality. Whether you're a grocery store or you're Algoma Steel, you know, or you're a little retailer, right? You're going to need technology to be successful. You know, I mean, great example is, you know, when we started to roll out the Shop Local campaign, you know, we're promoting it to the consumers, but we're also telling our members, you need digital adoption. You got to be online, some shape or form. You have to be there. So make the investment. There's programs to help support it, especially during that time. But you need to be there because that's what the consumer wants. And we're talking about think like the buyer, think like the consumer. Right? They're locked down at home. They don't want to go out. They may drive by and get curbside. You know, but they can't come in your store. So how do you showcase yourself? How do you create awareness? And you have to be, you know, on the lead, not necessarily the leading edge, but you know, you got to be there. You got to be present, right? And then when you adopt that, you learn how to tweak it and how to advance it. And if you have local capacity to fulfill that retailer's demand, that's absolutely brilliant.
Have you heard of that app, TaskRabbit?
No.
Okay.
No.
So it's really picked up in sort of like the more big city environments. They have it. In fact, I used it quite a bit when I was recently in the GTA. So I have a condo down there that Tracy and I were in the process of renovating, redecorating, that kind of thing. We're going to have it rented out and all that stuff. So I went down there for about 7 to 10 days. You know, I was down there for a short amount of time. And as we were, you know, giving this condo a makeover, so it would be, you know, really welcoming for a future tenant and that kind of thing, I was sitting there, I was like, you know, there's just too much for us to take on here. You know, we're mudding and painting and we're cleaning and we're doing this, that, and the other thing. We're taking trips to IKEA to just put some little nice furniture in there because we're renting it out as a fully furnished unit. And my brother had actually told me to check out TaskRabbit. And he was like, you know, it's super convenient, whatever. It's like the Uber for getting any random little stuff done around the house. Wow, okay, let me check this out. So I download the app. I go on, I'm like, type in my address, and there's all these different services. And I'm like, okay, I could use a deep clean in this condo. It's like, yeah, I could have someone to come by and, like, you know, patch up the countertop or something. And I just typed in I was choosing from a wide selection of all these different little services. And I had someone on the app come in and assemble and some furniture that I had ordered online. So there was one point in the day where, you know, we were standing in this condo and, you know, we're painting some walls and stuff. But while we're painting the walls, I got a guy from TaskRabbit who's putting together the furniture. I got another guy from TaskRabbit who's, you know, like smoothing out some cracks in the countertop. And I got someone else showing up a few hours after that to deep clean the whole place. And I went out to dinner with my girlfriend, right? And I was just like, this is so amazing, right? Like the work is getting done. Regular everyday people from the community are making good money. I'm not paying this money to like some big faceless corporation. These are everyday average Canadians who are looking to make some side hustle income. Mm-hmm. And I'm saving myself a ton of time and effort. And I think it's totally worth the money that I paid for it. So, you know, I was on my way back to the Sault from the GTA. And I was thinking to myself, like little stuff like this, like TaskRabbit, it would have such an extraordinary impact for the local economy, for the local prosperity of people who live in this community. Because, you know, let's say you're come home from your job in the Sault, you've got an empty evening. Sure, you could make some side hustle income by delivering for Uber Eats or something. Okay, that's one option. But if we had TaskRabbit, you could log on to the app and you could make some money painting someone's house. You could make some money cleaning someone's house. You could make some money, whatever skills you have, you can monetize that. And, you know, I naturally, like I went on the app, I typed in my Sault Ste. Marie address and did all this stuff. And I got a little message on the app that said, sorry, we are not currently in this region yet. And I was like, oh, wow.
Well, there you got the opportunity to develop. I think you'd have to call it, I'd rather be fishing.
Right? Like, it's like either you reach out to companies like TaskRabbit and you say, hey, this is really needed in Sault Ste. Marie. Can you launch over here? Or if they're not willing to do that, we create a made in Sault Ste. Marie solution that sort of mirrors TaskRabbit, that is a tried, tested, and true business model, because apparently they're doing really well in the bigger cities. And you call it something else that does largely the same thing, and you fill that need here. And I have every confidence that something like that will eventually be available here. There's just so much innovation slowly happening, and if not something made locally, maybe a bigger player like TaskRabbit will come in and launch that service here. But there's, like you were talking about earlier, like $1 spent can have a magnification, of up to $7 or more. So imagine just by that one company making that one decision to launch their app in this location, God knows how many locals here would benefit from something like that. Like more than anything, what we've seen from like the ride sharing industry or the food delivery industry, which does help a lot of locals make some side hustle income, which is great. But there's so much more potential, that with these other similar apps, So I was thinking about that a lot over the last week.
The opportunities are endless, right?
Yeah.
We just have to be creative in our thinking. We have to really, I think, in Sault Ste. Marie, get out of our sort of thinking along traditional models.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one of the biggest challenges in Northern Ontario, is, the history of being rather isolated. Right.
Right.
But now that there is more technology, you've got places like the Sault Ste. Marie Airport where you can connect now to the globe. That sort of infrastructure to do business has really gone a long way. We do need to repair our roads a little bit better, and it's pothole season. And this is, one of the things that we talked to the municipality about is like, it's great to have a 2-pad, arena. It's great to have a piazza. It's great to have a market. But at the end of the day, you need people to pay for those things so that you don't lose money.
Right.
So you have to be able to really think about what is that return on the taxpayers' dollars. Well, you need to bring more people here,
right?
To buy houses, to build houses, to spread their property taxes out amongst the population. Because, in Northern Ontario, all forecasts are that all our communities are going to be shrinking. That's the forecast. Sudbury has grown a little bit, but we have to put that behind us and think about, the things that we need to put in place to make sure we're attracting those entrepreneurs and those folks that will develop these type of applications that, are not just to reside in Sault Ste. Marie, but, think about going bigger. Like, how do we generate that kind of, gazelle, if you like, that high growth company, and how do you bring the dreamers? Right. How do you bring the dreamers? So, that's a challenge for us when, we think about most of our lines of thinking and traditional formats are probably based in the 70s here. I mean, it's reality in Sault Ste. Marie, right? I mean, we are sort of foundational, kind of a 70s sort of community. And a lot of us, recognize that there are people that, geez, if it was only just the good old days, right? But those days are gone. Like, you'll never get them back. So we need to think differently. And that's, we do need to make these investments in lifestyle things like the pad and the piazza and the market, but we also need to make sure that we're spending the money to invest to attract the people to come and pay for those things, right?
Right. Well, there was an article in Toronto Life not too long ago. I think it was Toronto Life or Narcity, or maybe both of them, that was just specifically about all the wonderful reasons to move to Sault Ste. Marie. And I was just floored when I saw this pop up on my news feed. I was like, whoa, these are big, well-known media brand names that are now talking about all the reasons to move here. That's that kind of media exposure is, I think, very, very much needed. It was surprising to see, but it was a pleasant surprise.
Absolutely. You know what also was another really good thing, and somebody once said to me that that tourism is the first step to economic development.
Right.
Right. So this is, key around those areas, and you've seen a lot of great lifestyle marketing around the tourism pieces, right, for Northern Ontario and Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah.
And that really is, I mean, it holds true, right? You bring somebody here and they kind of go like, wow, okay, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And lots to do. When people say, oh, there's nothing to do in Sault Ste. Marie. Then you get your head out of the sand, man, because,
get your head out of the sand,
there's tons of things to do here.
Yeah.
And, it's those things that when we're now getting 30 to 35 cruise ships that come through.
Wow.
To visit their day stops, right?
Great
Lakes tours. Yeah.
Wow.
But we need to get out of the box because there's absolutely nobody greeting them on the waterfront.
No.
And we're like, come on, people.
It's a missed opportunity.
It is. I mean, you should have a powwow there.
Yeah.
You could now, with a more diverse, you can have a cultural event there to show off the diversity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, these individuals are going to go back and talk about it to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And tourism is experiential now, right? And so we need to be investing money in those things to really make that experience as solid as possible, because it truly is the first door to economic development. And we have a great product, right? We have a great tourism product. So, that's one way of getting is to do the traditional marketing, economic development marketing, like you do. You put it in those publications about the place to live.
Yeah.
But you also need to have somebody come and share the experience, right? When we look at the potential again of Sault Ste. Marie, is that, we talked about the seasonality. Like eventually you're going to get bored of Bali. You got, 90 degrees sunshine every day and crystal clear waters is
It sounds good for a few months.
Yeah, it sounds good for a few months or a vacation. But, you've got something that's really dynamic here because, the activities that you can experience because of our 4 seasons.
Yeah.
And some of those seasons are more intense than the others.
Yeah.
But it still has something that is really, truly unique to our area, right? And that again is people are starting to migrate to those things that, it's just not, I get up at 9 to 5, I get on the subway, come home, go through the same routine every single day. Like here, it depends on what time of year it is. Your experience, is going to be totally different than it will be somewhere else, which again gives you that whole diversity, right? And again, that's a great attractiveness to get people to the Soo.
Yeah, I think people need like seasons around the year. I feel, in theory, it sounds really great to be in a place that's just warm all year round. And okay, theoretically, but something about it, I don't know, in my mind just seems maybe unusual to me just because that's not what I'm used to. Like I expect that, when it's time for the snow to fall, I want the snow to fall. Like my dog wants to go run around in the snow and roll around and everything. I like to, we've got a fire pit in the backyard. We light that up and then standing out there with the snow slowly falling on a cold night, but you're standing by the fire. There's something charming about it. It's something enjoyable about it. And then of course, when the summer comes, it's a totally different vibe. If I were to live in a place where it was just one type of weather all year round, I don't know. I feel like there's something that I'd be missing out on, So it's somewhat ironic that one of the things that people will sort of paint as a negative aspect of the Soo is like the incredibly long and harsh winters, but I feel like it adds to the overall dynamic of what the year looks like here. You want to be able to appreciate all parts of the year. Your December looks different from your July, and it looks different from your October, and that's a good thing. I think it creates a sense of, for me, it reminds me of when I actually did talk about this on a previous episode. It somewhat reminds me of the seasonality that I was accustomed to growing up in Bedford, Nova Scotia. There's your winters and there's your summers and there's all these different parts in between. And, I think that's, part of that reason and many, many other reasons is something that attracted me to this part of Ontario. And
yeah, it's interesting because just this weekend was a Cano Gala, the African Caribbean Canadian Association in Northern Ontario.
Okay.
And I had my adopted son from Nigeria, Ife, come from Toronto.
Okay.
And, he did an internship with the chamber and we became friends, and
nice.
He adopted us and we adopted him, basically. So I call him my Nigerian son. And he is so enamored with Sault Ste. Marie. He went to Toronto for work.
Yeah.
But so enamored with Sault Ste. Marie, and he misses it. And yeah, he was cold. Was he dressed properly? Well, maybe not. But, but the experience, his experience has been, the seasonality is something that he completely enjoys, right?
Yeah.
And then the Sioux, the connectivity he found here quickly, and the diversity in the Sioux is starting to change, and our cultures are feeling more comfortable in Sault Ste. Marie, which is great to see, right? And being more acceptive, and those are all very positive things. And we need to travel down that path, because we need to attract people from all cultures to come to Sault Ste. Marie.
Right.
But the interesting thing is, we were talking about, he's in the north part of Scarborough, probably not too far from the Scarborough Town Center. He says, I have a fire pit in my backyard. And he's like, there is no way I would ever light that thing. And there's probably no way ever I could get a permit to light it. And if I did light it, my neighbors would be all over me
they would lose their minds.
Oh,
I'm familiar with that area.
Yeah, absolutely, right? They would lose their minds. You're going to set my house on fire.
Yeah.
And which it may do. But, but here you are, you think about it. And one of the funny things that we noticed moving from Southern Ontario is the winters are very different. And Southern Ontario tends to be very humid.
Gotcha.
Right? So at -2 or -3 degrees Celsius, you're chilled to the bone.
Right.
But at -30 in Sault Ste. Marie, hey, I'm barbecuing. Right? I'm a shorts and sandals guy, right? And I will go outside at -30 in my shorts, because there is no humidity. Right? My wife looks at me like I'm nuts, right? But I'll put my Crocs on and out I go. And I'll have a fire pit, right?
That's
it
great.
Just, so
Love it.
you can make those adjustments. So it's a great place to be, and I think there's continued opportunity.
Yeah.
And we really need to seize the day, and build that passion for building our community, right? So, I think what you've found in most Northern Ontario communities, because I talk to all my colleagues, right?
Yeah.
So, oddly enough, there's like 32 chambers of commerce in Northern Ontario.
32 chambers.
32 chambers. Some of them
Lord.
very, very small, like either volunteer-based or half-person. But we have, our major Thunder Bay, Timmins, North Bay, Sudbury, and ourselves, right? We get together on a very regular basis, and we talk about our communities, right? And there has been, I think, a bit of an awakening that we need to be outside of who we used to be traditionally, right?
Right.
Just our community, no outsiders, and now we're like, well, yeah, we want people from other cultures. We want people from Southern Ontario. We want people from the East Coast.
Right.
We want people from the West Coast, and because it just builds a better community.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It goes back to that diversity thing.
It enriches the economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when we take a look at it's kind of, funny to just spin it this way when we open up talking about chambers, is talk about it again, is that, you think about that 32 chambers in Northern Ontario. This is, I tried to explain this once when I was doing some advocacy work at Queen's Park. And I think we were in the official opposition's boardroom, and they had these two pictures on the wall, and they were both the same size.
Okay.
And one was Southern Ontario and one was Northern Ontario. And I said to all the public servants and the politicians in the room, if you truly want to understand Northern Ontario, take the Southern Ontario painting and put it on an 8x11 sheet of paper. Leave the other one exactly the same size it is. Because that really is what, when you think about the size of Northern Ontario, it will blow your mind.
Yeah.
Like, really. When people from Toronto say, I'm just going to drive up to North Bay.
Good luck.
Yeah, have fun with that, right? 3 hours out of Toronto, and then it's another 6.
Yeah.
And it's hard to comprehend that. So, to think that there's 32 chambers spread out, I mean, that's a lot of small communities, that have some connectivity, that are looking after their own little business community and trying to do things similar that we're trying to do. And, to be able to harness that power is hard, but we try to do that as best we can, working together as a northern network of chambers, so it's and it creates a bit of a dynamic as well. So when we talk about business needs and trying to foster an economic entrepreneurial ecosystem, we try to do that as one voice.
Yeah.
To say, hey, there's power in this. Because the reality is, when you take a look at what drives or has been the primary drivers of our economy in Northern Ontario, it's mainly resource sector based, right?
Yeah.
Mining, lumber, water power, if you like. And that feeds Bay Street, like all the junior miners, all the publicly traded companies, gold companies or lithium or nickel, that feeds Bay Street, but it also feeds bankers,
right?
Engineers, environmentalists, environmental engineering and those kind of things. So, there's huge power in the economy that we have existing. Now we want to be able to, I think, take that perspective and say, okay, how do we have something that's different? We diversify the economy into these things like software development.
Yeah.
How do we start to think about, ICT as part of our economy? Because, eventually natural resources will run out. There's policy afoot that really makes it hard to develop a mine.
Right.
So there's a lot of these things that are happening. So we need other economic generators. We need to start thinking away from those traditional ways of creating jobs into creating economies. Really, is what you're looking at.
So you said that you were down at Queen's Park. Tell me more about that. You were there for what?
Yes, we do a lot of advocacy work, right? So talking to public servants, talking to the politicians about policy, how it impacts business, or impacts your community.
Okay.
I'm actually down there on Monday.
Oh, wow.
On Monday, so we have a full day scheduled with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce from 8 till about 6:30 in the evening, like 8 in the morning till 6:30 in the evening. So we're talking about things that are important to us as a chamber, as a community, as Northern Ontario, a province, or Canada. It really kind of depends. But when we're there, when I'm representing Sault Ste. Marie, I always want to put a northern spin on it, right?
Right.
Because you want them to realize, just like in that depiction, Southern Ontario versus the expansiveness of Northern Ontario. You want them to realize that and understand why it's important to think about, policies and how they impact, the unintended consequences, right? So, let's talk about electrical infrastructure, right? So we just sort of briefly talked about PUC and installing, the power outlet for an EV. That is a different conversation between Southern Ontario and Northern Ontario, because Northern Ontario needs power grid infrastructure. That's our primary thing. That, once you get outside of Sault Ste. Marie residential, the power infrastructure is absolutely critical to the future development of our economy. Where the focus is in Southern Ontario tends to be what you just did, investing in stations or outlets in home to be able to charge your EV, right?
Right.
An EV at -30 reacts differently than it does in Southern Ontario.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of those things. When we start to travel the path around the electrification, Northern Ontario is more grid-based and infrastructure-based, where it's more distribution in Southern Ontario. So two very different departments, or two entities that take care of that, different types of government policy and funding needed to address that.
Right.
So those are the kind of the messages that we want to bring to them. One of the things that I have, the fortunate circumstance to be attending a meeting with the deputy minister that is focused now on health and addictions, and the ability to talk around the conversations, how that impacts community, obviously, and individuals. But as a chamber, we also want the policymakers to understand the impact that it has on businesses.
Right.
Right. And a lot of people say, wow, addiction is not a business issue. You say it is 110% a business issue.
Yeah.
Right. And from a number of different aspects.
Yep.
One is obviously the health and well-being of your labor force, your employees, right? And there's a cost to people calling in sick, to people not showing up. There's a cost associated with that because of the outcomes of addiction, right? There's break-ins and theft driven by the need to fulfill one's addiction.
Yep.
And people just say, oh, you just claim that on your insurance. Well, people don't realize that if you're like a retailer downtown, most likely your deductible's $5,000.
Yeah.
So when somebody breaks a window and steals $1,000 worth of clothing, that's out of your pocket.
There's a mental health impact on the business owner as well. It's not just a financial ramification.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even business owners can fall into those things. I mean, addiction knows no socioeconomic boundaries. It knows no cultural boundaries. It takes whoever it wants for whatever reason, right? It is a business issue from a number of different aspects. And the ability to communicate that. And interesting, I just had my car serviced, and we were talking about some of these things because the facility now has to gate all of their vehicles because of catalytic converters being stolen, right, to feed one's addiction. And the service manager was telling me about, he had a customer that had a truck and it needs a specific converter on it because it's a diesel. The cost is $10,000. He had it stolen 4 times.
Oh my God.
He just said, and insurance doesn't cover that. And he said, I have to close the business because I can't afford it anymore. I can't make a living. So that $40,000 was basically his wages. So, those kind of things. And sometimes people just don't connect the dots.
Yeah. And
part of our role then is to connect those dots for them, right? And to think about then, okay, well, policies that we're considering, yes, they're focused on the general community. Absolutely. But we need to make sure also we're supporting the business community because they're dealing with these things themselves as well.
I didn't fully appreciate the way that the dots were connected. The way that, when you have rampant, unfortunate addiction in a community, the way that can then spill over into all these different issues where it's like, okay, you've got people committing property crimes to feed their addiction. You've got business owners who are incurring losses, damage to their property, damage to their assets because of this type of crime happening in the community. It's all so interconnected, and and it makes you worry for the future economic growth and prosperity of the community. It's like, well, sure, you can attract all these entrepreneurs and future business owners into the community, and they can, with all this enthusiasm and optimism for the future, they can pour money into a storefront or like a automotive type business like you were talking about, or a software company, whatever it is. But they're operating in an environment where there's a domino effect happening, where one type of problem rooted in addiction is causing another problem, and another problem, and another problem, until it affects the whole system. And it's like, what do you do with that? I've said this so many times before, and maybe even once or twice on this podcast, that it's my understanding that lawyers are 3.5 times more likely to encounter substance abuse problems and depression and also suicidal ideation, or are actually making that choice to end their life, And for me, it's such a complex thing, because I was talking to a lawyer just today, not within the company I work at, it was a different company. And, we sort of touched on this topic about how you pursue this line of work, and all of a sudden, as the years go by, so it's not all of a sudden, it's slowly, it's slowly and gradually, but as the years go by, you wake up one day and it feels like all of a sudden you discover that, this work that you've been doing has had this terrible effect on your mental well-being. And then you have a choice to make. Do you pursue something else? Do you close up shop and reinvent your life? Maybe that's the best thing for you, right? Maybe that's the key to your happiness, depending on who you are. It's something that I was thinking about as you were telling me that story of the business owner who said, you know what? I just can't afford this nonsense anymore. I'm gonna shut this stuff down. I can't afford another bill for a stolen catalytic converter or whatever. Just like, there are other professions out there like lawyering I just mentioned, where they wake up one day and they say, you know what? This was my last straw. I can't do this anymore. And that hurts everybody. That hurts the whole community. When you have service providers, businesses that meet the needs of the community, when you have them getting so burnt out because they're just sick and tired of being broken into.
If I can,
I'll
just share with you that my brother is a lawyer. He was a Crown prosecutor.
Okay.
And was really in the juvie courts, right? And it's tough because you see a side of life that most of us in the middle class, to be honest with you, would never see. A certain socioeconomic sector,
right,
that has challenges, whether it's family, mental health, financial, or whatever. You're dealing with a lot of really challenged individuals with some potentially violent or criminal outcomes, abuse, all those kind of things. And it happened to my brother. And the trigger was when my dad passed away.
Okay.
Took it very hard, and he woke up one day and said, that's it. I can't do this to myself anymore, because he had his own issues, and was actually diagnosed with PTSD.
From his job.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
From his job.
Does not surprise me.
It's, it's crazy, what it can do. And people tend to look at, professionals and business owners as being immune from these things. And the conversations these days that are happening are really, really, really great. And the support mechanisms that are happening for businesses and their employees are really starting to get the notice that they should have, right? And those implementations that you need to have in a business. And here's kind of a role for a chamber of commerce, because what you tend to see in the business landscape is the larger corporates have the capacity and the resources to fulfill on those particular kinds of needs, right? A chamber of commerce is 90% small business. That's 100 employees and less.
Yeah.
Most of them don't have an HR person, let alone access to maybe even employee benefits, which we actually offer through an organization, a network across Canada. But even just the basic understanding of where to start. If I think somebody's got a drinking problem or an opioid problem or another addiction problem and is bringing it to work, what do I do?
Yeah. What do you do? Yeah.
What do you do? And where are those resources, right? And, part of our role is to connect folks to those resources locally, right? Whatever they might be, and sort of say that, this conversation is okay.
I didn't even know that the chamber does that kind of work.
Yeah. So we have, it's really kind of a great plan. It's done with what's called the Johnson Group, which was actually set up as a not-for-profit organization.
Yeah.
And they built out an employee benefits plan for chamber members only.
Wow.
So it's not for profit, so they recycle it back into product development, keeping your rates down, and it will do an employee benefit for a person of one. And most programs won't do that, right?
Wow.
For entrepreneurs, it's like taboo.
Right.
But, this plan does that, and it does it in a very cost-effective way. But it's even that, as you start to see those programs, they have really developed a lot of support mechanisms now along the mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
Alongside of, some accounting, some legal, some human resources.
Yep.
So that there's somewhere to go, if you want to call it a safe place to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Because this is sometimes the biggest fear, with a business owner is like, I don't know how to handle this, but man, I'm really, I don't know what people will think if I go out and have these conversations, about an employee. They're going to, am I going to break confidence? There's all these things rolling around in the mind of an entrepreneur, a business owner, about the what ifs, right? And, all I can say to them is just think about what if you didn't take action?
Yeah.
What would be the outcome?
Yeah.
Right. So there are ways that you can get connected to folks that can help through some of these issues and help deal with employees, right?
Yeah.
Or different aspects, right? So, but it is phenomenal, I think, how central this conversation has come within the business community about the value of health and well-being.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about that today, and it's all connected again, right? It's all connected to whether you want to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem and attract folks, how people are looking at work differently. And, it really is an interesting concept now that we're seeing just evolve.
I think it's really, really commendable that your brother made the brave choice of being honest with himself and saying, that's it. This is where I'm drawing the line. I'm not going to do this to myself anymore. In fact, I would say a lot of lawyers don't ultimately make that brave choice. They'll stay in a role performing work that is harmful to them, and they'll keep doing it well past the point of burnout, well past the point that they should be working, and they'll just keep doing it.
Yeah.
But he made the brave choice to do what was good for his mental health and get out of it. And I'm curious to know how that story unfolded further. Like, what were the things that happened in his life and the choices that he made thereafter, after coming to that sort of aha moment, that point of enlightenment where he's like, I need to change course. How did that ultimately unfold thereafter?
Yeah. So, he had him and his wife and his son had to make some, hard decisions around how do you manage a household and, loss of income and those kind of things. And he was able to, I think he said he was probably the first Crown prosecutor that ever went on a disability claim or something through government support, whether it's WSIB, I'm not too sure, but he ran that battle through saying, and this is an interesting story, can a lawyer as a Crown claim disability, right? Or through that process for income support, diagnosed with PTSD.
Right.
And in those days, we're talking probably 8 years ago now, he got out of the workforce for 5 years and he's just started to work back in as a research side. He got out of the courtroom.
Yeah.
Got out of the criminal
I don't blame him.
Stuff and all of that.
Yeah.
So now he's taken on a role he can work from home, but he had to go through therapy sessions. He had to find ways to express himself, became an artist, right? So that is his therapy now, right? Is being connected into his art. And he does it for himself, even though he probably could make some money on the side doing it. But, but it was a process, but you got to have the support of your family, right?
Yeah.
And, and that was a journey for him.
I see so much, if I may, so much of my own journey, the story that you're telling me about your brother, especially when you just said those words, he became an artist. It's funny because I don't know how to paint, but I don't consider that to be the definition of artist, right? An artist is anyone who expresses themselves. You could
Absolutely.
be a singer, you could be a content creator, you could be doing podcasts, right? But you got to get in touch with the creative side of your mind and your soul and feed that part of your soul and give that part of you an outlet to express yourself. And I think that just has the most wonderful mental health benefits. And, for me, I'm far more happy having conversations like this, really like meaningful human conversations. And of course, sharing that with the world with all this wonderful technology. I'm so much happier doing that versus standing in a courtroom. And it sounds like your brother came to a similar realization and did what was right for him. So
absolutely.
There's so many professionals. I forget lawyers for a moment. Doctors left the profession in droves during the pandemic because I imagine the mental health impact on them, as well as nurses and other medical professionals. They left because, they had to draw a line at some point saying, this is too much for me. And whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or any other professional in a high stress job, it's so important, I think, to be honest with yourself about, when is enough? And when are you going to make time for human expression, artistry, in whatever form that might take, and finally experience all the joy that can come with that. And yeah, maybe it involves changing your financial situation. Maybe it involves making some sacrifices in that regard. But if you do it with your family, if you talk about it with them and say, you know what, maybe we can make those financial sacrifices and in fact be in a position where all of us are just so much happier as a result.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I had mentioned earlier that my father was a British engineer.
Yeah.
And they're not known as the most touchy-feely individuals on the planet, right? Like, they're not emotional.
Yeah.
And I always say, when I make an engineering joke, I've earned every right to do so.
Yeah.
But that concept of you need to hold it all in.
Yeah.
Right. And that is itself, a self-perpetuating harm to your emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because, again, to sort of put this back into like a business owner's context, right?
Yeah.
Is if you're that individual, you're that leader, you're in that position, and you think that you can't talk to anybody about it, right? Or you can't express what you're feeling, or the emotional turmoil you're in. Whether and we talk about lawyers and accountants and doctors and that, they're still professionals, right? All these guys are still entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
All those people are still entrepreneurs, right? Or intrapreneurs.
Yeah.
And, if they've taken control of a situation and put themselves in those leadership positions, they tend to isolate themselves from expressing their emotions that they're feeling, right? On a professional level, if you like. And that's why, when we talk about starting a business and being an entrepreneur and measuring risks, you have to realize that that's part of it too, right? And that's why we say bringing people together is probably one of the best things that we do. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Whether we're convening for advocacy or bringing people together just to have a meal, or one of our Take 5 Love Local events, bringing those people together is an outlet for that. Right. And it puts you in a safe space and an environment where, a lot of people have been there, done that. Right. And if you're a new entrepreneur, I can't stress enough how beneficial that can be to you. Right. So, it's interesting. I'll just, we just had our local Take 5 Love Local at a funeral parlor, Barton's funeral parlor. Right. And people are kind of, wow, that's kind of weird. Right. I'm just like, wow. No, I mean, they just spent a ton of money remodeling. And why did they remodel this? They remodeled it because the way we treat death is changing as well, right?
Right.
And it's more now around the celebration of life, as opposed to bringing finality to it. I mean, that's part of it, don't get me wrong. But the celebration of life, and it's interesting as we start to change those conversations and recognize, what somebody brought to the table as an individual. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. That's just part of life. But it was interesting to see how the funeral home business was changing its model as the consumer demand changed. And I think the thing that just brought it home for me is in one of the corners they had a display, and it was a snowmobile with pictures of the individual and the urn on the snowmobile.
All right.
You cannot say anything more than Sault Ste. Marie-ish than, you know what, when I go, I'm going on my snowmobile, and you're going to bury me with my snowmobile. It's just, the essence of Northern Ontario, right? So, but those are some interesting dynamics that are kind of changing in our world today.
Rory, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I feel like I could sit here and talk to you for another 3 hours. I wouldn't even notice the time go by. And I'm sure there's going to be people that listen to this episode and reach out and ask for you to come back. And that'll be really exciting. We've covered so much today. We've talked about the mental health side of entrepreneurship. We've talked about, putting Sault Ste. Marie on the map in terms of its future economic growth opportunities. And there's just so much. And it's been for me, such an exciting discussion as an entrepreneur, as someone who has spent a great deal of my career building up a business and currently running a few multiple operations and investments. And I really hope, it's my hope that out there, someone has in the local community has absorbed what you've shared with us today. And, maybe they decide to take that first step and they build something new and they create something. And one day I walk into a business and I see this thriving store and the owner tells me, hey, I listened to Rory on that episode and I decided I was going to do this, like that to me would just be like a dream come true. So.
Well, that's awesome. You know what? That would be an amazing outcome.
Yeah.
And if we can do that more than once, that's even more amazing, right? Hey, I've really enjoyed the time, and thank you for the invitation. And
my pleasure.
I will accept any invitation to come back. So I really appreciate, what you do here. Appreciate you for being a chamber member, and, really love it. And I look forward to watching some of the podcasts.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Soo Podcast.
Follow us on Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. And be sure to check out our website at soopodcast.com. That's SOOpodcast.com.